So it is a pleasure to have Himanshu Tyagi with us, and he is a wonderful speaker. So let me raise the expectations, and we are looking forward to a very good talk by him. So over to you, Himanshu.
Just once, I'll just say hi, and then I'll just switch off my video because I'm not so sure about the bandwidth that I have.
Yeah.
Just if you have any questions in the middle, just feel free to stop me and raise the questions. Okay, so thank you, Ketan, for inviting for this talk, and you have raised expectations, but I don't promise to meet any expectations. But this is a topic which is which I find very interesting. I've been looking at it for about 1.5 2 years now, and the topic is optimization of convex functions under communication constraints. And this is based on joint work, mainly with joint work with Prathamesh Mayekar, who is a PhD student in IISc, working with me. And you can see various logos here, and the reason is that a lot of people are supporting this research, and I want to recognize all the parts of IISc that are feeding into this research. So I went to the seminar website and I saw that there have already been several talks on optimization, and also Ketan being there, I guess many of you have taken a course in optimization. Nonetheless, I plan to go very slow in this talk. So I plan to roughly also go through some simple proofs, and so this will be a technical talk, and we'll see some convergence proof. And the reason I'm doing this is to bring out where exactly do this communication constraints enter, and how easy it is to extend the known literature to this setting. That's what I want to bring out. So let me start. Okay. So convex optimization is a classic topic, a beautiful classic topic. And in this era of machine learning and so-called data scientists, one should first decide, why do we worry about convex optimization? And here are some 3 very simple examples, which I've chosen because lately I have hired some people for the position of data scientist to analyze some data for me. And I find that all of them actually know these 3 tools. Even they may be implementing deep learning, but they really don't know what's going under the deep learning frameworks. But these 3 they have some better idea of. So these are, I think it's safe to say, some of the most widely known tools for handling data. Okay. So these are examples of machine learning models, perhaps in the pre-deep learning era, which entail convex optimization. So what is machine learning in a nutshell? Well, you have, this is supervised machine learning. So you have data points AI and BI. AI is a large vector. It can be pixel value of your image or something like that. BI is some label associated with that data. Okay. So this can be, for instance, some quality of experience that you get when you see at this frame from a video. So it can be a number. So in this case, this BI is, take value in this at B, calligraphic B, and you have n data points. N is some number, so think of how many data points, some large number of data points. What we want to keep in mind throughout this talk is that this n is large, but still not comparable with this D. D is much larger. That's the interesting regime we want to look at. Okay, that's typically the case in many of the new machine learning models. Not necessarily these 3. These 3 are may not be used for such high dimensional data, but that's a setting in mind. So what is the regression problem? Well, the regression problem is that this B is R itself, and there is some theory which justifies that if you learn this X, that will form a good model. So what are we trying to learn? We say that as we associate the relation between BI and AI, we express the relation between BI and AI through this vector X. So you take AI, your pixel values, if you want to keep that in mind, and multiply it with this X transpose. And this is your proxy for BI, but actually there's an error in this estimate, this minus BI. And so you put some loss function, this square, and you minimize this. This is the loss function you minimize in regression. Notice that we're solving an optimization problem in X, and it is a convex problem in X. Next, you can look at logistic regression. Now this B is just like classification. So B is just 0, 1, 2 classes. In this case, you fit you instead of thinking of the prediction value as 0 or 1, you allow soft outputs. You want to output the probability with which this B is 0 or 1, and the model that you fit has the sigmoid form. It's linear. It's the sigmoid of this linear function. And then there's a story, but in nutshell, what happens is this is the x that you learn, and you want to minimize this cost. This cost is log of 1 plus e to the power minus something linear in x plus something linear in x. All the data points ai, bi are appearing here, but the function in x looks like this. X is the unknown model that you're learning. And you can convince yourself that this log 1 plus e to the power minus z is a convex function, therefore the whole thing becomes convex. Okay, this is one thing, and then just one second. Okay, sorry. Yeah. So then third popular model is this SVM model. Now in this case, this B it's very similar binary classification, but it's customary to denote it by -1, 1. And once again, you can set up a cost function. The prediction now is simply sine of x transpose AI, but you use this loss function, which is called hinge loss, and it also has this convex form. One interesting thing here is that while these first two loss functions are convex and differentiable, this one is not differentiable, right? What is the difficulty in implementing this algorithm? One difficulty in implementing this algorithm is finding this point here, this G that you have to find. Okay, so if the data is large, somehow you have to compute the gradient at a point. If n was large in the previous examples, the complexity of computing this G will grow with n and also D, and so it will take some time. And second part is this projection step is also a complex step. You have to project on a convex set, it will take some time. Okay, these are two steps which are complex here, but once you have that, then the update is very simple. So it's a general purpose algorithm, many benefits. You would have probably already seen it. You probably also know that its convergence can be analyzed very easily, and that's what I'll present next. I'll present the convergence of this algorithm, which is a classic well-known result for convex functions. Okay, so let X be a convex set, as we have been saying, and let F be this convex function on it. And to show convergence of this projected gradient descent, we need to recall just two properties, okay, of this convex function. First property is this one, that if you look at this function f, maybe let me see how bad my drawing is here. So, sorry, not too bad. So this is a better picture of a convex function. You start at this point x and you move in this. This is bad. It's a straight line. Huh? You move in this direction. That's what. So you move in the direction of the gradient. You start from fx or fy and move in the direction of the gradient. Sorry, how do I explain this one? It's better to explain it this way. Fy minus fy is greater than fx plus gradient transpose y minus x. So you started from fx, and then moved in the direction of the gradient size y minus x. Fy should lie above it. That's what this inequality is expressing. But this is the form in which we'll use it. Okay. So fx minus fy is less than equal to gradient transpose x minus y. This holds for subgradient. In fact, this is a definition of subgradient. The set of all vectors which satisfy this condition is called a subgradient. Is the subgradient set at point x. Okay, this is one property. Second property is a projection property, which can be proved without much effort. It holds for just because x is convex, you can prove it. That if you take a point y and look at the point y0, which is in x and is closest to y, then for any other point x in x, y0 minus x is closer than y0 is closer to x than y. Okay, the projection is closer to any other point in the set than the original point, which is outside the set. If the point was inside the set, then y0 is equal to y, and there is equality. If it's outside, then you can imagine that for a convex set, you can draw some plane here, and everything will be on this side of the plane. Okay, that's the second property. So these two properties are all we need. Okay, to analyze the convergence of projected gradient descent. Okay, so let's look at the proof, which we'll modify later. It's great that you can present proof of convergence of such a popular algorithm in a talk in 5 minutes. That's how clever and nice this proof is. So f of xt minus fx star, this is your point that the algorithm has after t iterations. How far is it from the minimum value? Well, this is the subgradient property. It's less than equal to gx transpose t xt minus x star. Okay. But the way the algorithm was said, this gx transpose, the gx, there should be a transpose here. This gxt itself is xt minus yt plus 1 by eta. There's a transpose here. So you see something like a into b, and we want to write it as a minus b square minus a square plus b square minus a minus b square by 2. That's how we want to express this as. So this is this square plus this square minus this minus this square by 2. And this is inner product and squares are norms. Okay, so product is inner product and squares are norm. But this is what this property is. This is a very clever step. And now we take this and this together. So we see it this way. And this guy again is a gradient step. So we write it this way. And so you get eta by 2. Eta is in the numerator here because an eta square came out and eta is in the denominator here. Okay. But now we use projection property and see that this one actually should, if we replace this yt plus 1 with xt plus 1, okay, we will only increase the thing because we are subtracting smaller quantity. And so you get this property. So what is so special about this expression? This is some constant. We will make some, we hope that the gradients are not too large and we can control this quantity. But this one is a telescopic sum. So as you add these errors over time, only the first one will remain. That is the brilliance of this bound. Okay. So if you sum from 1 to t, you'll get the first term minus the last term, which is, but it's negative, so you can drop it. And so you divide by t, you get this bound. Again, this quantity is something we'll control, saying that gradients are not too large. And this quantity, this is a starting gap, but it's going down to 0 as 1 by t. And we are free to choose eta now. So if you have seen this kind of optimization, if you've seen this kind of trade-off for eta, you know this is, you can differentiate and minimize, but you should also know that a good answer, even without differentiating, is make them both equal. Because if you increase eta, this one will decrease. If you increase eta, this one will increase. So you make them both equal. That's a good answer. In this case, that's also the optimal one. That gives you the best choice of eta, which will come down to soon. Okay, so we use convexity of f to take this average inside. And then we minimize this side by setting eta optimally. And what we get is this. Okay, this is the convergence rate for gradient descent. Note that the output is not x of capital T, but the averaged value till that point. So look at all the points your algorithm went over till that point and take its average. That's the output you get. This works for convex functions. So this minus this is less than equal to the starting gap distance, square root of this quantity, which is square root of how your how large your gradients are, plus 1 into 1 by root t. So barring the dependence on the dimension that comes from this quantity or this quantity, this is somewhat dimension-free convergence. Okay, you get a 1 by root t convergence here. And that's the very interesting part about this projected gradient descent, that it gives you 1 by root t convergence. Okay, to make it look pretty, we'll make 2 more assumptions. This is customary. One remark I want to make is that algorithms working and theory for algorithm working are slightly different things, although they are related. So all this is some cosmetic thing. This algorithm in practice does very well. Okay, and we have some handle on how it does well. Now we put some assumptions and we will get a cleaner form for the convergence of this of this thing. So first assumption we make is that f is L Lipschitz. We can't assume that f is differentiable, and therefore we can't talk about gradients. But if you assume that f is L Lipschitz like this, okay, then you will get a bound on subgradients of f, and that bound would be L. All these guys, this norms will be bounded by L square. Okay, so this guy will be bounded by L once you make this first assumption that f is L Lipschitz. This just say, if you haven't seen Lipschitzness, it's a very simple condition. When you change the when f of x minus f of y is less than equal to L times the distance between x and y. Next assumption is that this set X, or which we are optimizing, has diameter D. So what is diameter of this set? It's the maximum distance between 2 points in the set. And this is what we mean by. So in particular, this guy is also less than equal to D. You started somewhere, you can start anywhere. And you know that this convergence will be better if you started close to the optimal. But in this kind of generalization over any such F, which is L Lipschitz, and you're optimizing over a domain with diameter D, the bound you will get is dl by root t. Okay, that's the bound for projected gradient descent. So this is some background story. I'll build up on this a little bit. Any questions till this point? Okay, so if not, let's go to the next step. Still something not our work. So next thing is I'll present this projected stochastic gradient descent. So subgradient calculation, allowing for subgradients helped us. We don't have to worry about functions having gradients, but the subgradient computation in projected gradient descent can still be expensive, especially for large dimensions. And what if we only compute noisy estimates of subgradient? Okay, so very smart computer scientists, such as those who are in IIT Kanpur, they come up with very clever ways to do sampling and reduce the computational complexity of such things. But then you will not be given a guarantee that what you came up with is actually a subgradient. You will have a guarantee that it's a noisy estimate of such a subgradient. Suppose we have such a guarantee, can we still run a projected stochastic projected gradient descent with a noisy estimate of the subgradient? And the answer is yes. PGD with stochastic gradients will still converge. We should call that one PSGD, projected stochastic gradient descent. And we'll make some assumptions about this noisy gradient estimates. These are again standard in literature and also very reasonable. First assumption we make is that these stochastic estimates of the gradient are unbiased estimate. What do I mean by that? That if you take average over these guys, so this, what does it mean to condition on XT? It means the average is over the computation, the randomized computation that you do in computing this random gradient estimate. This guy should be in the subgradient at XT. Okay, and second condition, which is slightly stronger than what you will see in literature, but I think for this talk it's okay, that each of this stochastic gradient is norm bounded by P. Just to remind you, this Lipschitzness assumption actually was used to claim that this guy is bounded. Okay, so here, sorry, I should not go back, but that's the replacement of that Lipschitzness. We directly assume this guy is bounded. The noisy estimates themselves are bounded by B now. Okay, so suppose we make these two assumptions, then I will not show the complete convergence proof. It's exactly the same, but I'll show the first starting point where you'll be convinced that the proof will go through. So now, because XT is random, because our gradients are random now, G hat instead of G, they are noisy estimates of subgradients, not really subgradients. So we put an expectation here. And so this expectation can be written as expectation of the conditional expectation given XT. And when you have this conditional expectation given XT, one thing to note is that since this guy is a subgradient, you can now write this inequality with this guy here. This is a subgradient. That's the unbiased assumption being used. But then you can again take the expectation outside and you will get this. So in other words, the first inequality that we had, that's the only one which used the subgradient property in the convergence analysis, can be replaced with another one with an expectation sitting outside. But the same thing, now you'll have G hat XT, the actual update of your algorithm inside, just by this very small. These are very simple steps, but there's some trickery involved here. We assumed this, took expectation outside, and then we saw it. So from there on, you can do the same proof what I showed you. And this G hat XT can be bounded by B. In fact, you don't need a bound of B on this norm. You need an expected, you need a bound on L2, capital L2 norm of G hat. So you need a second moment of the norm to be bounded by B square. That works. But this one definitely gives that. And then you complete the proof, same way you proceed. L gets replaced with B, and what you get is dB by root T. It's exactly the same proof, except there is an expectation here. So once again, going to show that this PSGD, perhaps the most simple algorithm, is kind of beautiful. It can even handle noise in a nice way. If instead of subgradients, you had noisy subgradients, then same kind of convergence analysis can be done. Okay.
There is a question in the chat that norm bound is not very different from Lipschitz property. Is that correct?
That is correct, except that this G hat is not the subgradient. This is a slightly different assumption. It's about the noisy subgradient. This is a noisy estimate of the subgradient. The conditional expectation of G hat is the subgradient here. G hat, so this is some assumption we are putting for our analysis to go through. But it is exactly to replace the Lipschitzness. It's not too different. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just a small remark is that this is a condition on the G hat that you formed, which by some, this is the noisy estimate that you're forming, not the actual subgradient.
Yeah.
But I think your point is well taken. Yeah, that's true. So this B is actually a replacement for L. So rather than coming through Lipschitzness, we directly make this assumption. Thanks. Useful question, I think. Any other question? I don't think I can see the chat window. So if you see any question, if anyone can read it, it will be great.
Yeah, if there's anything in the chat, I will just ask you directly.
Thanks.
Sorry, how G hat is different from a subgradient here?
G hat is a noisy estimate of subgradient. Okay. So for example, one example would be that you compute a subgradient, but you don't compute the entire vector. You compute its randomly sampled coordinate. Okay.
Oh,
and
okay.
And then from that randomly sampled coordinate, you construct some estimate of G hat by putting zeros in all the dimensions except the randomly sampled one. This is a popular technique called random coordinate descent. Now, right? So that would be your G hat. It's not your actual subgradient. It's an estimate of the subgradient, and you scale it appropriately to make it a unbiased estimate for the random coordinate descent. And then you will have some B bound, which will come from your construction. So this is a general analysis through which you can analyze many different algorithms which you use to come up with a G hat. You can do it in a different way also.
Okay, is it because of this noise you are taking this expectation? This
right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So this theory is this includes sampling. There is some randomness that is allowed in coming up with this estimates of G hat. So when I say noisy, I mean random noise, which is not really maybe noise. It's coming from the randomness in your algorithm for coming up with G hat.
Okay. I was thinking that because of the subgradients, you are taking expectations over all the XT so that it is something close to the actual gradient. But that's not real.
No. So subgrade, just to this is a very good point. I should clarify it right away. This subgradient to actual gradient, there is no hope. Because think of that pointy function, it doesn't have a gradient there. So subgradient is the appropriate generalization of the notion of gradient. Okay, we want to look at functions such as those which come up with SVM, which do not have a gradient at some point. And so what this theory first to begin with tells you, it took some time to get us here. I mean, gradient descent goes 200 years back, right? So, but now what we understand is we don't really need the gradients. It's enough to have subgradients, okay? Which means that give me any point in the subgradient. I'm not telling you which subgradient. As long as this subgradient inequality is satisfied, my analysis will go through. This I'm going back, sorry, but it's just all we need is this. And this is the power for the algorithm designer. This sampling you can design in a way that you give me some vector here. Okay. Thanks. These were useful questions, I think, for everyone. Okay. Great. So we have this convergence analysis, and here is what has been happening till now. We'll now move to the topic of this talk. So there's an optimization algorithm, and there is some procedure which computes the gradient. This guy sends model parameters X to it, and this gradient guy computes gradients or subgradients and gives it back. And the theory has evolved over the years, and instead of gradient, you can compute subgradient, and that will help you handle functions, bigger function classes, just convex function without differentiability. And then from there, you can also allow noisy subgradients, which means you can now creatively compute some noisy versions of subgradients and reduce your computational load. Okay. So I think this is, I'm not an expert in this history, but I think one of the motivation to generalize this theory this way is to handle computational constraints. And that's why we have reached here. Okay. Now it turns out that in recent years, a new kind of constraint has emerged, okay? Namely communication constraint noisy subgradients. So I'll describe two applications where this constraint would be very useful. The first application, which is sort of a buzzword, and buzzwords have a negative connotation with it, but it's, I think, a very nice effort. It's called federated learning, which is happening every day. If any of you have seen this Google Home or Alexa from Amazon, if you have such devices, or even if you use an Android phone and you do that stride thing that you do to type, all those devices are recording data from those devices and reporting it to a central server, which makes a model for your behavior. It's a parameterized model. It maintains a parameter, and unless you have switched off some privacy, if your privacy settings don't allow it, unless you do that, but then your experience wouldn't be so great, especially for things like Alexa. It sends some information to the central server to update. Okay, and this information is sent over your Wi-Fi network. Okay, therefore it should not take too much bandwidth. These models that they're using are deep learning models. They can run into, not hundreds of megabytes. They can, but not the ones they're using, but 10, 20 megabytes. Okay, and so it's not that you can just send it every second or so. You want to do it sometime. For instance, Apple phone asks you for some permission at night when you are charging to do something, some optimization. I think sometimes you can allow it to do these kind of updates. Google Pixel, I know, does that kind of thing as well. Okay. So what is the abstraction of this particular application? Here is the optimization algorithm running at a parameter server, which is sitting in some cloud. This guy maintains your model. It sends you some model parameters. Then you compute the next gradient update and send it back. Because data is here, you're not getting the whole data back. And this you may not be used single user, but there are multiple users, and this model can be trained on multiple users. And so it goes to the next user, gets the gradient update, except that now the gradient updates must be sent within some smaller number of bits, some R bits. And so we quantize this subgradient estimate. So this noisy gradient output, we quantize using R bits and then send it back. Okay, that's the setup we have here. Another application which is slightly different with this application, the federated learning application, you should think of this parameters server setting where there's a server which is running the algorithm. A more interesting, not a more interesting, but a slightly different application which is already used in practice. This federated learning is also used in practice, but in some sort of a stylized way. But a more interesting one, which perhaps some of you who have trained a neural network would have used, is programming a multi-GPU machine to train a neural network. Now, each GPU computes this gradient oracle from, you split data between these two GPUs, and each GPU will compute this gradient oracles, and then they will exchange this with each other, and then they will update. This is not the same model, but it's a related model. There also you have to quantize the gradients. Of course, when you work on a single machine, the communication library that you have is something different. It's not a physical communication. You'll use a fancier communication library. And Vineet, who's one of our MTech students who was working with me and is sort of an expert in this. You can add something, Vineet, if I missed something here. I think he's here, but maybe not. I can't see the attendees right now. Okay, so these are two settings of interest to us. But in abstract, we are interested in this model. This is, I think, sort of the next kind of constraints beyond computational which have emerged. And it just asks you to put a block here. And the question we want to answer is, how will this block be designed to get the convergence result that we want? Okay, that's a topic of this talk. So basically, gradient quantization for convex optimization. This convex optimization is important here. I'll restrict to convex optimization throughout this talk. In subsequent work, which is sort of not published yet, but with Prathamesh and some other collaborators, we've gone beyond this convex optimization, as in with more assumptions on the function. Okay, but for now, I'll just restrict to this. Okay, I hope the problem setting is clear. So only thing is, how do we quantize the gradients so that if we run the PSGD algorithm, this is a starting point, we'll just go with PSGD algorithm to begin with, and then we'll see how good our answer is. Okay, so if we run PSGD with this quantized gradients, how should we quantize the gradients? So remember our gradient assumptions. I've started calling this the algorithm which computes the gradient or subgradient or noisy subgradient the oracle. And currently this is unmotivated. Like why would I like to call it oracle? Oracle is someone to whom you can ask questions and it will give you answers. So that you ask a question about xt and you get an answer g hat xt, and you have this guarantee for this oracle output. Okay, so I'm just thinking of, so we will not worry about how that part is implemented. It's a black box for us. We can ask question and it gives us answer. Okay, and these are the assumptions which we had for our oracle, that it's unbiased and it has this bound B. Okay, so the output of PSGD we saw satisfies this constraint, this convergence rate. This output, by the way, was average of all the iterates of the algorithm. Now, we can, one simple way to analyze PSGD with quantized gradient is to just treat this quantized gradient as oracle responses. So you implemented some quantizer, but then overall combined thing becomes an oracle. So we can treat this as oracle responses. And for simplicity, you can analyze without this also, but we restrict to unbiased quantizers. So it's unbiased. Let's say our quantizer is unbiased. So what does it mean? That if you take expectation, there are two expectations here. One is over the randomness of G hat. Second is over randomness of Q. Because you can, many quantization algorithms involve randomness, and in quantization world, this is called dithering. In signal processing world also, this is called dithering. Thus, dithering is nothing but using a randomized quantizer. Okay. So you take the expectation over Q, you get back this guy. And that's, so now you are done with the randomness in the quantizer. So this is what I'm calling an unbiased quantizer. And since this was to begin with assumed to be in the subgradient at X, this is also an unbiased gradient oracle, Q of G hat. Therefore, if we execute PSGD as before, with using this in place of subgradients, what we get is this bound. The B now, B was the bound, worst case bound there, and there was some, you could have gotten this expectation over also. Now gets replaced with this quantity, the small modification of the proof that I showed you. Okay, exactly the same proof actually. Just this guy has become the gradient oracle now. So what we want to handle for convergence rate is the maximum value of the expected value of the gradient of the Q of gradient, but Q of gradient can be any number here. That's the assumption we had made about our gradients. So we are taking further max over the output of the quantizer over any numbers here. Forget about just those numbers being gradient. Q of Y, these numbers are from a Euclidean ball of radius B. The capital L2 norm of that random variable. What's the maximum? So this is a feature of the quantizer that enters your analysis. So we want to design quantizers which are unbiased and have as small a value of this as possible. One small remark is that if you design this for B equal to 1, by multiplying and dividing by B, you can design for any B. So we'll just design for B equal to 1. Okay. So this is the quantizer design problem. Design an unbiased R-bit quantizer. R-bit quantizer means that Qy takes at most 2 to the power R different values so that you can represent it using R bits. But these values, of course, are in D-dimensional vectors. So these are values in RD, but there are at most 2 to the power R values. That's what an R-bit quantizer is. So design an unbiased R-bit quantizer Q for the unit Euclidean ball such that the cost alpha Q, which I'm defining here, this guy, max of the second moment of the quantizer output, max over all inputs in the unit Euclidean ball is minimized. So you want to minimize this alpha Q. Very simple quantization problem you want to answer. Is the quantization question clear? I hope this is clear. If you want to understand, if you want to ask something about this formulation, this will be a good time. So if we just plug in our quantized value into PSGD, the kind of quantizers we want to design are these ones, which are unbiased and they minimize this cost.
So the reason you have taken it like this is just to remove the dependence on XT and so on.
Yeah, so you could have gotten Q of G of XT and some max will be there, but see, it's you can't really have any handle over the noisy gradient outputs because they are typically obtained by sampling procedures. That's why this worst case bound makes sense. But if you have better understanding of what those will be, you can do a more refined analysis. That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Because this is for convex functions where gradients are anyway, they don't get, they can remain the same in magnitude. Then you do this random, some random procedure over that to get noisy gradient estimates. So we were just going with the worst case performance. But you are right. You can write a more refined dependence on the actual trajectory of the algorithm. That is true. Yeah, please go ahead. There was another question, I think.
Yeah, I was asking that why we had to bring these quantizers into the picture, because we were working with the gradients. Now we are working with these quantized gradients. So what was the purpose for them?
Okay. So this is the purpose. That's the question we are asking, that suppose these algorithm and gradients are separated as they are in federated learning. So this gradient oracle will send this real numbers. Just think of so PSGD is used beyond convex functions. So if you think of what someone like someone working in computer vision will implement, there will be something like let's say a ResNet 50 layer neural network or something like that, which I have been told that has 23 million parameters. Okay, all real numbers. So you will not send 23 million parameters for every iteration. You probably can send some fewer number of bits, whatever you want to send in half a second or so.
Okay.
Right. So the question is, how do we quantize these gradients so that we get the convergence right? So we are taking a very simple approach for it. We are first giving an algorithm. But okay, we want to come up with an algorithm. We will just run PSGD, and we will design a quantizer so that its output can be just fed into PSGD. And only thing that changes is that this QG hat is now a new oracle. So remember, to analyze performance of our algorithm for a given oracle, we need to understand two things about the oracle. Firstly, about its bias, which we always assume it's unbiased, because some convenience. And second is this quantity B, which now gets replaced with this.
Right. So now the problem reduces to find this quantizer. Right?
Correct. At least that will give us one answer. It's a separate problem whether that answer is good or not. Okay, it will give us one answer for convergence rate.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I will do next is I will design a quantizer with some value of this alpha Q. Okay. And I'll claim it's a good quantizer. Okay. So here is a quantizer from our ISIT paper last year. Somehow we had done other things before this and they were longer, and it doesn't have all the benefits, but this is so simple and nice that I like presenting this one. Okay, so we'll call this the simplex quantizer.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, in the last slide, how you design, how you know the what value the R will take, because this optimization problem will.
No, R is fixed. So the way I'm posing it is that for a fixed R, what is the smallest alpha you can have? So you're fixed. You can be very conservative also. You say that I will allow you to send only 100 KB. Okay, per gradient. Instead of the 10 megabyte that you require to send the ResNet 50 parameter or something, maybe it's even more, 100 megabyte. I will just allow you 100 KB. Okay. Typically, if you don't do anything, your computer would be anyway quantizing it to some 32-bit precision or 54, whatever, depending on the architecture. That will be very large actually. Okay. So this is much smaller number. That's how you should imagine. Does it make sense?
Yes. Okay.
And I guess that's why you are calling it this communication complexity, right?
For communication constraint. Yeah. So this R is the communication constraint we are imposing.
Right.
Okay, good. Since I never put down a formulation, these questions are getting the formulation named. Okay, great. Okay, so we are building this quantizer which will feed into PSGD, and that will make our algorithm run. And here is this quantizer. Note that we have to quantize all the elements in the unit Euclidean ball. And take this orange guy, that's one typical element in the unit Euclidean ball. What we do is we take this L1 ball, which is outside the unit Euclidean ball. this L1 ball looks like this. Okay, it's a simplex. So this is the subset of those elements. This is not the this entire L1 ball is a set of those x such that if you sum their absolute values, that's less than or equal to 1. So what's the L1 radius of this guy? Well, if you don't know this, it's some simple application of Cauchy-Schwarz. This radius is square root d. Okay. So here it looks like it's close, but the radius of L1 ball that you need to choose to cover this guy is square root d. So it's just a unit ball, but this in the corner it goes really far. When d is large, this is square root d. Okay, so this is the ball that I've drawn there. I've drawn it into 2 dimensions, but imagine this guy in high dimension. And so here's a very simple idea for a quantizer. Take this corner points. This outer set is a convex set. So any point here can be expressed as convex combination of these guys. So there'll be some weights that you have here. There'll be non-negative numbers. Their sum would be 1. Right? That's what these weights. That's what a convex combination means. And therefore, you can treat these points as some probabilities. And you can sample these guys with this probability, and that will be an unbiased estimate of the center. That's the idea of this simplex quantizer. Okay. So more specifically, just putting this in maths, these extreme points are actually easy to write down. These are just the standard basis vectors scaled by root d. That's what these extreme points are. If you do a 2-dimensional thing, that's what this will be. There is a plus minus thing going on here, but yeah, somehow, yeah, sorry, I should write plus minus. So plus minus of those. So what we do to implement this in algorithm to find these weights is, it's very easy. We sample the index I from 1 to d with probability mod q yi by root d. Y is this point by the way. Okay, so index I is sampled with this probability. And you note that this probability, these numbers do not sum to 1. Okay. The norm of this guy is less than or equal to root d, but the numbers don't sum to 1. The numbers can be less than 1. They may or may not sum to 1. If it's on the boundary, it will sum to 1. Otherwise, it may be less than 1. And so therefore, there's a probability that you don't sample anything here. And that's when you declare, that's when you sample this index 0. This capital I is a sample index. And our output of the quantizer is just root d times the standard basis for this I. So this is 0 everywhere and 1 only at the ith entry that you sampled. And then you multiply it with sign of that entry that you sampled. Okay. And we use the convention that E of 0 is the all 0 vector. That's the output. You can check that this is actually an unbiased. If you take expectation over all these I, you will get back yi. That's why I was sampling things with this probability. Okay, so it's an unbiased estimate of y, this quantizer. Okay. So it's unbiased. That's one. Also, see how the values are. It's 0 everywhere, and only one entry is plus minus root d. So what is its 2 norm square? It is just d. That one entry contributes, nothing else. Okay, so for all y in the unit ball, this is unbiased and it has this 2 norm square d. And this guy takes 2d plus 1 values. Why 2d plus 1? You only have to tell me right. So 2d for the sign also comes in. So 2d for that part. And then if it's 0, then the sign doesn't matter. So that's one value. So it only takes either 0 or plus I and minus I. These are the kind of values it takes. So 2d plus 1 values. And it has these features. So some quantizer we came up with, which takes 2d plus 1 values, is unbiased, and has this alpha q equal to d, or less than or equal to d. In this case, equal to d, I think. Okay. Okay. So this is a good quantizer to begin with, but you see it takes, it has this way, it has this alpha q equal to d. We would like to make the alpha q smaller. Otherwise, you'll get a d blow up in your convergence rate.
So could you give some idea that why this simplex is actually important? Because you just gave us the example that suppose we want to transmit the gradient of ResNet and it is large, so you want to compress it. So how this is actually helping in that compression?
This is the exact description here. So the advantage of this guy is that there are very few corner points of the simplex.
Okay,
D,
right.
they're just D corner points. So D different values. So in principle, you are expressing this D dimensional vector using D points. Typically, you should take exponential in D points to express, even if you took 1 bit per dimension, right? But now to express this, you're taking only D points to express. But you pay here. You pay here in terms of the extra that D that you got. Sort of, this is a proxy for noise, and this is large here. Although the y was a unit vector, but q of y now has this norm square D. That's where you paid. But otherwise, you are just the number of values is very few.
So D is basically the dimension of the ResNet, right?
ResNet, yeah. So some millions of them, right?
Okay.
So right. So if you did, suppose what is the baseline? I think I never presented a baseline. Baseline is a uniform quantizer for every coordinate. Okay. That will take at least 1 bit per coordinate.
So that is basically D dimension.
2 to the power D values, right? That's the number of values the quantizer output will take. This is only taking D values, not D bits, D values. For now, okay. So, okay, but this is not good enough because of this D. So we do another trick on this. We repeat this several times using independent randomness. And now for each time we get this y hat 1 to y hat k. And take the sample average of this guy as a quantizer output. So just repeat it several times. Every time you get some answer y1, y2, yk, y hat k. These are quantized values obtained from SimQ. And we take the sample average. Okay. First, very important observation. Actually, we didn't have this observation for some time, but when I stated it's very obvious now. Actually, this takes very few values, although we are adding all these vectors. But all you have to tell me is number of time you sampled 1, number of time you sampled 2, number of time you sampled D. Okay. And number of time you sampled 0. That's all you have to tell me. So this guy, it's what is called a type of this vector in information theory. You just have to tell me about a type of this vector. It can take at most D plus K, choose K values, log of that for bits. And the second K bits is, since overall you will just sample K coordinates, you just send their signs separately. So K bits for sending their signs. So it can be represented in less than these many bits. This is an upper bound for log of D plus K choose K. Okay, that's what you get. And it's still unbiased because I'm just taking this average. And this guy gets reduced to D by K now. D by K plus 1, this is the bound we could get. Forget about this plus 1, small number. Okay, so that's our final quantizer. It has this K here, which you can tune, and this will reduce this. In fact, what we will do is we will set this K to be D and make this a constant so that we get the same convergence result. Okay, so this is the conclusion here, that this SimQ plus, I'm calling this SimQ plus because we repeat this. Actually, Prathamesh named this SimQ plus, and SimQ also Prathamesh named. And we set K equal to D. It uses less than something slightly more than 3. So 4D, less than 4D bits, some 4 number. I don't worry about this factor for now. So less than 4D bits and has alpha Q less than 2. So we found a quantizer which uses 4D bits and has alpha Q less than 2. So if we go back to our convergence bound, this gives us the same convergence rate. And this factor of 2, in this talk, we'll not worry about the small constant factors. So it's the same convergence rate of dB by root T. And we have used 4D bits. So SimQ plus can retain the unquantized convergence rate using 4D bits. Okay. And the question is this: can we do better? Can we do better than using D bits? Can we do better than using 1 bit per coordinate if we want to get this rate of convergence? That's the question we want to answer. So I'll move to the next part. There are 2 things we want to check before that. First, is this clear? Second, I don't think I have much time. How much time do I have?
So basically, this is giving a logarithmic compression, right? Because you had.
No, this is bits. This is still bits. So yeah, so I said uniform, so then that may confuse you a little bit. Actually, if you analyze uniform, its performance will be really bad. There'll be other extra factors that will come up because you don't really know anything about this Y except this B bound. You don't know anything. So what will you set as the range for your uniform? You will just set this B. You know nothing else. So it will add up basically. Okay. But right. So uniform is the baseline, but this is better than that. It can get you D bits. So this can get you the unquantized convergence rate using 1 bit per coordinate or 4 bits per coordinate, if you like.
So with uniform, if we do 4 bits per coordinate, will we have a larger factor here?
Yeah. Some other dependence on D will show up here.
Yeah. But I guess it is fine as long as it is a constant like 2, 4, 10.
Yeah, it won't be. It will be a D dependent thing. You will not get a constant.
Okay.
Yeah. So
you can maybe conclude in 10 minutes or so, although like few minutes after 5 is fine.
Okay. So the question is, can we do better than this 4 bits per coordinate? Okay. And I had planned to present you this information theoretic lower bound proofs in detail, a little bit detail, but let's quickly do it. I think we'll able to do it significant part in 10 minutes. So, okay. So this is just a review of what you've seen till now. I've just put everything in one place. So we want to characterize the optimal convergence rate. So we want to derive a lower bound. This lower bound sounds like, how can you derive a lower bound? Lower bound on the convergence rate, in particular lower bound for us on the number of bits required to retain the same convergence rate. And one thing we have to understand is that we are committing to a class of algorithms when we derive this lower bound. So what is that class? I'll tell you. But first, recall our assumptions. X was a convex set with diameter D. F was a convex function, unbiased gradient updates, and norm-bounded gradients. This is what we have been seeing throughout. So now we consider optimization algorithms pi, which use only the gradient oracle to access the function. Nowhere they use anything else about the function, only the gradient oracle outputs. That's the kind of optimization programs we want to consider. So why just update it xt minus some eta something? Why don't we do something fancier than that? Okay. That's what we're trying to answer. Okay, so we'll just quickly, I'm just introducing this notation. This is the max over all functions and gradient satisfying this, min over all algorithm satisfying this. What is the minimum you can get here? Min max over this, minimum worst case convergence. And this is a well-known result due to, I think, should say Nemrosky, but I don't know, maybe this one was there also. The lower bound for this one was there before also maybe. But I think Nemrosky, you didn't, I don't have the correct attribution for this one. But yeah, that one of these three guys, Nemrosky, Yudin, maybe Nesterov had something here. Okay, so this is a well-known result that you can't do better than 1 by root t, dv by root t that we saw for this in this class of functions. You can't do better than this. Okay, so in that sense, PSGD is actually optimal if you don't have quantization constraints. So for us, what we are interested in this quantity, I'll just call R star. It's a minimum R such that we can find a quantizer Q and an optimization procedure pi, which has this 1 by root t convergence. And what we have shown is that this R star is less than or equal to 4D. And now we want to derive a lower bound on this R star, the minimum resolution required to get this convergence rate of 1 by root t. I've just kept the same factor 2 as what we achieved just for convenience. Okay. So when you derive this lower bound, you have to think of a difficult class of functions. And so here is a seemingly very simple class of functions, which turns out to be the difficult class here. So X is just minus 1D, minus 1D. Okay. The L infinity ball, the rectangle, except that you scale it to make its L2 diameter D. That's why the scaling is there. And then this functions for each alpha is a random sign, is a sign vector, minus 1, 1. Each entry is minus 1, 1. Just take this alpha transpose X. It's a linear function in X. Some coordinates are added, some are subtracted. That's what this function is. Scaled with some quantity, this delta will be tuned at the end. you can check that this function actually has a gradient. It's a linear function, and the gradient is just this. Important thing is that this gradient doesn't depend on x. Now, we want convergence over any oracle, and consider this particular oracle, which, so what does the oracle output? It outputs something whose expected value should be this gradient. So it outputs this b by root d times this random variable z. Each coordinate of z is independent, plus minus 1 valued, and it takes value 1 with probability 1 plus alpha I delta by 2, and obviously then minus 1 with probability 1 minus alpha I delta by 2. You can check that the mean of this gradient oracle output is actually exactly the same. Oh, sorry, I missed a root d here. Square root d, this thing. And the variance, you can just compute this. Each vector is plus minus 1, so you get d square. So that's the kind of oracle we have constructed. So our algorithm observes quantized IID samples, Q of Z1, Z2. See, it observes this also, but this is a scaling it knows, so it can throw it away. It observes this. That's one way to think of it. You can put this here. And outputs xt. So typically, this is the crux of the idea. What you do to derive lower bound is you relate this optimization problem to an estimation problem. And so this was the function. The oracle was giving independent samples of the Z1, Zt. They were all product Bernoulli with mean this delta alpha times some scaling. And optimality gap we will now show is the same as the error in estimating this minus alpha. So this optimality gap is this thing here. You can write this function of this form, and then you can show, because of the structure of this function, that this is exactly the same as this. So the gap is related to as problem the estimation error for alpha. Okay, now I should just quickly rush. And therefore, we are looking at this problem of estimating mean of a product Bernoulli distribution. Product Bernoulli distribution is a distribution where samples are independent across coordinates, plus minus 1 valued. Yeah, that's what a product Bernoulli distribution is, with different means potentially for each coordinate. And so this estimating this mean of product Bernoulli under communication constraint or quantization constraint is something that we have studied and others have also studied. And so for this one, you use what is called this Fano's method to derive the lower bound. Yeah, sorry, I'm rushing, but I guess anyway, we didn't have time for this. So we can derive lower bound using Fano's method for this problem. And what you can show is this bound here. So this is a lower bound, which relates the gap to optimality for this class of functions. This expectation is over a random choice over many things, including a random choice of alpha. This can be related to a mutual information between this V, which is a random alpha, and QZ. This T is our T. We bound this mutual information, we optimize, and we get this bound. Okay. So we rushed, but yeah. So it looks like this d by root t will come, but there'll be a division. So this 1 by root t will come, but the multiplication will be with a root d by r. Okay, so we get an extra root d by r factor in the lower bound. So in particular, if you want to make this 1 by root t, you must have r at least omega d. This bound for this mutual information is interesting. So this v was at unknown mean. Qz is the quantized value. Since Qz takes at most 2 to the power r value, r is an obvious bound on this mutual information. Okay, but we are getting an extra delta square factor here. This delta was the mean of the product Bernoulli. So this is sometimes called a strong data processing inequality. I mean, it can be derived using a strong data processing inequality, which was derived here. This is a paper I have with Jaydev Acharya and Klimokanon, where similar bound can be derived using connection between divergence and chi-square divergence. Anyway, this delta square shrinkage is what is important here. And you are free to choose delta. You just choose delta in a particular way to get this bound. So at the heart of it, we have identified an estimation problem that you can solve using your optimization procedure. If you have your optimization procedure, which work for every convex function and every stochastic oracle. And that gives you that r star must be at least omega d. Okay, so this is a summary of our result, that this R star, the minimum required to get the optimal convergence rate, is omega d. Upper bound was 4. Lower bound is not, the constant is not horrible, but since we use Farmer's method, we don't expect this constant to be tight. I think something like 1 by 100 or something will come. And SimQ plus that we presented, which is a very nice simple estimator, attains it. Okay, now just wrapping up. So I just decided to present a single result because I thought I can give more details on this. But so as anyone else, you have to run an industry. There are many things we are doing here. So most of this work is with Prathamesh, the work on optimization, who is already given his PhD colloquium and will be graduating soon. So he, this particular paper from ISIT, we not only looked at this L2 ball, which I presented, we also looked at LP ball. So when X is not just the L2 ball of diameter something, it's the LP ball, LQ ball, and correspondingly you change the assumptions on gradients to LP bounded gradients. That's typically how it is done. And there the optimal one, this RP for pth norm, so this is R star one, is order log t, which is attained by SimQ, it turns out, without going the plus thing, without the plus thing. And we also have optimal bounds on R star p for all p, almost optimal. There are some log factors which we haven't handled yet. Then you may ask, why am I worrying about the smallest R for which I get optimal rate? Why not we look at the rate for a given R? Actually, this SimQ plus and SimQ will not work for that regime, and we have other estimators in a different paper which quantizers which work for that regime. They're more complex, more complicated. But again, for L2 convex optimization over L2 ball, we using R bits, we have almost tight bound using an estimate, using a quantizer we called RATQ. And then very recently in this paper, which will come in AISTAT this year, this is a joint work with Anand Tirtha Suresh as well. We looked at a different problem where the decoder also has some side information, okay, about the gradient from other user and so forth. And we wanted to see how well we can apply ideas from Wiener-Zirf coding to improve convergence rate, and not just rate region, but practical scheme for Wiener-Zirf coding. So we actually have very interesting implementation of a Wiener-Zirf coding scheme using what is called correlated sampling, which gives us a nice convergence result. It is written in a slightly different language in the sense we are looking at the mean estimation problem here, but they're all the same problems. And finally, I would like to point out to this line of work that I have been doing with Jaydev Acharya, Clemo Kenon, and some other very good co-authors, including Prathamesh, on deriving lower bounds for statistical inference under information constraint. So we saw instance of one such lower bound where we wanted to estimate the mean of a high dimensional distribution under communication constraints. But you can imagine umpteen problems like this, hypothesis testing of this kind, statistical inference of this kind. And information constraint need not just come from communication, they can also come from privacy requirements, and they can also come from other places where you cannot just send quantized information, there's a noisy channel in the middle or something like that. So we have developed sort of a general framework for handling such information constraints. I'm only pointing to the lower bounds, although this line of work has many nice algorithms as well for statistical problems. A little bit off topic from this time. But the lower bounds here are useful in optimization as well. Okay, so I just presented our work, but this is a topic which has hundreds of years of history and beautifully written papers on this, many of them. So stochastic optimization started with this work by Robinson Monroe, and the Oracle framework that we looked at, the Oracle complexity framework that we looked at is due to Nemirovsky and Yudin. This Nemirovsky, I think, but maybe this book, this is a monograph by Nemirovsky and Yudin. Most of my presentation, the way I presented the proof, is from Bubek's monograph. Okay. And I think some of these simplifications are also from Duchi's note, although I don't think I use anything from there in this particular presentation. But of course, we gained a lot by reading these notes. And so information theoretic lower bound started with Nemirovsky's work. This is Nesterov's book, Introductory Lectures on Convex Optimization. This also states this lower bound. And for more general classes of function, it was done in the work of Alek Agarwal and al. In 2012. this communication limited setting is now viral. No way to follow all the literature in this. But these are the initial papers by Alistra, and this is I think from a Microsoft group, and this paper is from a Google group by Anand Tirtha Suresh and all. And there are many works close to us. We're just citing the one which has a vector quantizer similar to the simplex quantizer. Of course, one may wonder what's going on with this new quantization problem. There are 50, 60 years of history on vector quantization literature, and indeed, you can draw a lot from that literature. I've given the references which we learned from. But one thing I would like to point out is that there was never a quantization problem of this type, where things need to be done at this time scale for this dimensional data. Okay, and therefore the algorithm that we are looking for now are different, in some sense more practical, and also you can't assume that someone will implement a hardware accelerator, at least currently. This is like setting the foundation for those hardware accelerators. So it's not like you can pick up some solution from here and implement it for these problems. But I think good to know this literature. Okay, I'll just stop, and these are the papers on which this talk was based. Thank you.
Thanks, Himanshu. Any questions from the audience?
Yeah. So when you when you are sending this quantized gradients, right? So is it so is it secure? Like if some attack happens, can they extract some information? Like people do use this differential private techniques while communicating, right? So is there any scope of applying those techniques before sending this quantized subgradients? That was I was thinking.
Very nice question, actually. And in fact, indeed, there is a huge interest in that problem and many results. That's the other famous information constraint. One is this communication. The other one is what you can call local differential privacy. And yeah, just like, see, the way I put it, it was abstract. I had said that this QY, I put two conditions on QY, unbiased, and I put some requirement on the mean. Okay. You can put the same requirements on your LDP mechanism, except that the R that I had, R bit quantizer, that will get replaced with some local differential privacy requirement, epsilon delta local differential privacy requirement. So that's the kind of thing you will try to do. And the same, I think there are many papers on this. I don't know which is the currently leading one, but yeah, there are many papers on this point.
So while you are optimizing that thing, that quantization that you are optimizing right now, so you are saying we can optimize on both the objectives, right? That's what you are saying.
So instead of optimizing over all R-bit quantizers at alpha q, you optimize it over all epsilon delta differentially private mechanisms q.
Okay.
So that's a mechanism design problem. You have to design that particular mechanism. So typical differential, this is a Gaussian vector. I think this is a slightly tricky differential privacy problem. I mean, you don't have much. So I'm actually not aware of what is the state of the art on this. That's why I'm not commenting. But yeah, the problem is well defined.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? So maybe you didn't show us any plots or anything. Did you implement it?
Right. So we did implement it, not the SimQ plus, but this is only theoretical one. This other one we implemented, and so the implementation plot we have. So the story is that if you implement this at scale. Okay. So I will show you some plots, and they will show you some 85-90% accuracy on MNIST data. You will not like it because people have 98% accuracy on MNIST data. And to get 98% accuracy in MNIST data, first you have to tune the hyperparameters. So that kind of implementation we don't have. But we have some toy implementation which we stopped showing because we got this kind of review that. On the other hand, the distributed optimization problem. So implementing quantizers for, let's say, for optimizing ResNet, okay, ResNet 50. That's what Vineet has been doing. There, the story is that that the time it will take to implement things like the SimQ plus we didn't try, but non-linear quantizers and other Hadamard transform we had in the other quantizer, it will dominate the cost. So you have to do something else, some other kind of quantizer, some sampling ideas. So that's the story. That if you go in practice, at least currently, the gains that you get cannot be justified by the time it takes to compute those quantizers.
Okay. And this brings to another question, like, can this framework be plugged into the proof for non-convex SGD?
Right. So non-convex we haven't tried. You mean quasi-convex, something like that?
No, like totally non-convex. So they have this local convergence guarantees, right?
Okay.
So can this framework be plugged into that, and then similar local convergence guarantees or local minimum guarantees?
So I don't know much about that framework, so I will not be able to comment. But yeah, it will be very interesting to see that. We are looking at still convex optimization, but with more conditions. So strongly convex, smooth function optimization, these kind of things.
Okay. Yeah, but the quantizer sort of does not care whether the function is convex or not. So I'm just thinking that if
Yeah. I think
properties can be used.
Yes, I think so. I think what the recipe is simple. The recipe is to abstract out, and this will be the case, I think, in any of these things, that what feature matters about the quantizer. My view is that it will, the strength of the output, the norm of the output will matter. Because you're taking a step in that direction. So if your quantizer is unbiased, but it takes a large step, just like the SimQ without the plus part, cost you. It's taking longer step than your actual gradient, but it's an unbiased one. So that should show up in the cost function in any of these. And unbiasedness part is there in the stock, but we can even handle bias if you can handle convergence of your algorithm for bias oracles, which for this convex functions you can handle.
Yeah.
So that is also possible.
Okay.
Prathamesh, I'm not sure if I can't see him. Maybe, do you have a comment on the non-convex part? I haven't thought, but maybe you have thought about it.
I don't think he's here.
Okay, I can't see who are the attendees somehow.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Thanks, Himanshu.
Yeah.
Really interesting talk. I really like the lower bounds, the way that you have developed using this information theoretic inequalities.
Yeah, I wish I should have said more on it, but fine, that's fine. At least I conveyed the main idea.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks again, and we will send you the link for this.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye.